Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're unpacking a monumental, truly global challenge. The maritime industry, this is the backbone that moves over 90% of the world's physical merchandise. How it plans to hit net zero emissions by 2050.
It's a huge undertaking.
And this isn't just about the giant vessels, right? It's about aligning thousands of ports, reforming these incredibly complex supply chains, and totally reinventing shoreside logistics.
That's absolutely right. The sources we have really detail the definitive roadmap for this transition. They cover the whole spectrum from, tiny adjustments to a ship's hull all the way up to these monumental decisions in global finance.
So what's our mission for this deep dive?
Our mission for you today is to understand the core arithmetic of net zero, why just switching fuels is maybe only half the battle, and where the biggest operational, regulatory, and financial risks really lie for any company in this space.
And we've got a stack of documents here defining everything: the scope, the tech, the entire regulatory architecture, the IMO rules, market-based measures, new fuel pathways. But before we even talk about new engines, we have to establish the baseline.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. And maybe we should start with the most critical and probably least visible step. How do we actually count the carbon when the ship is only one link in a very long chain?
Precisely. Before a single investment decision is made, the entire industry has to fundamentally agree on what emissions even count. The traditional benchmark, which is tank to wake, it only tracks what burns inside the engine. It's wholly insufficient for a real net zero ambition. Genuine decarbonization demands what's called a well-to-wake scope, so the fuel's entire life cycle.
So we're talking about tracking the carbon footprint of the fuel before it even gets near the ship's tank. What specifically is included in well-to-wake, and why is that such a game changer?
Well, it means tracking emissions from fuel extraction, from the processing, the transport, and crucially, any bunkering losses right up to the moment of combustion.
And that's the game changer because
it stops companies from just shifting the environmental problem upstream. If you miss that boundary, you achieve what the sources call a false victory.
Give us an example of that, a false victory.
Okay, take a theoretically low carbon fuel. A ship could claim zero emissions at the smokestack, but if that fuel needs massive amounts of, say, coal-powered electricity to produce, or if the production process has significant upstream leakage,
then the net benefit is gone.
It drops to near zero. Well-to-wake holds the entire supply chain accountable. It forces transparency on the fuel producer, not just the ship operator.
And beyond just CO2, what are the other gases we're most concerned about in this context?
The core portfolio includes CO2, nitrous oxide, black carbon, and for the next decade, most critically, methane, CH4.
Methane is the big one.
It's the immediate threat because its global warming potential is about 28 times that of CO2 over 100 years. So if you ignore upstream methane leakage or engine slip, you are actively working against your own net zero goal. It's like draining a tub while trying to fill it with a leaky faucet.
That puts so much pressure on the data. How do regulators like the IMO take this complex global math and turn it into real targets that apply to, a giant oil tanker and a tiny feeder ship?
They do it through standardized mandatory metrics. The main one is the Carbon Intensity Indicator, or CII. It measures CO2 emissions per unit of transport work, so per ton mile.
So it creates an apples-to-apples comparison.
Exactly. It's essential for comparing that hugely diverse global fleet. Every single ship gets scored annually with a grade from A to E.
So the CII is the report card.
It's the report card. And if you get a D or an E for too long, the regulator can demand a corrective action plan. This creates a powerful financial incentive because charterers, the people who hire the ships, are increasingly using these scores to choose who they do business with. But none of this works without credible data. Measurement, reporting, and verification, or MRV. It has to be non-negotiable for this to have any credibility at all.
Okay, that establishes the regulatory pressure. But before we get into, expensive new engines and risky fuels, what are the immediate practical steps ship owners can take today? The things that directly improve that CII score, the operational quick wins.
Right. So the documents show the industry is pulling two major levers right now. First is maximizing energy efficiency through design and retrofits, and second is optimizing operations with smart planning. These are things you can do now.
Let's start with the ship's physical structure. We know ships are efficient, but where are the hidden energy losses?
Hull optimization is foundational. We're talking about using advanced tools like computational fluid dynamics, CFD, to really micromanage how water flows around the hull and reduce drag.
And the most visible part of that?
Is using advanced low-friction hull coatings and just having really rigorous fouling control, keeping the hull clean. Depending on the vessel and where it trades, these applications can give you up to 20% fuel savings.
20% is huge. But, I mean, let's be skeptical. Those coatings wear down, barnacles grow back pretty fast in warm water. How do you maintain that 20% saving over, say, a 5-year cycle?
That's the critical operational challenge. The tech only works if the owners commit to continuous monitoring and frequent in-water cleaning. But now the CII gives them that perfect financial reason to stay disciplined. Every percentage point of efficiency improves their grade.
And I love this next one, harnessing natural power. It feels wonderfully low-tech, but I guess it's actually very effective.
It's just smart engineering. Wind-assisted propulsion. So technologies like these huge Flettner rotors, they look like big spinning cylinders on the deck, or rigid hard wings, are making a massive comeback.
And the savings.
You can get fuel reductions of up to 10% on certain routes with good wind. And critically, this is a saving you can stack on top of your hull optimization savings.
Okay, now let's talk operational transformation. The things that crews and planners control every single day, often without changing any hardware.
The simplest and most impactful is slow steaming. Just reducing your service speed cuts fuel consumption steeply. The relationship is often cubic, so a small speed reduction gives you a much larger fuel saving. We're talking up to 20% in some cases.
But wait, if every ship slows down, don't we just end up needing more ships on the water to move the same amount of goods? That doesn't sound very net zero on a global scale.
And that is the trade-off. Slow steaming is great for one ship's CII score, but it makes schedules more complex and could potentially inflate the fleet size needed to maintain global capacity. So it's a short-term fix.
So we need intelligence. We need the ships that are moving to move smarter.
Exactly. Voyage optimization. This uses predictive weather routing. The models choose paths that use favorable currents. The sources mention the Gulf Stream can cut fuel by about 2% for some transits, and they avoid heavy fuel-burning seas. Smart planning overall can deliver up to a 10% fuel reduction.
My favorite logistical win is the one that deals with just wasted time. Ships sitting outside a port for days, just loitering.
That loitering is pure carbon waste, so reducing that by synchronizing arrival with when a berth is actually available, the industry calls it just-in-time arrival, is probably one of the highest return interventions you can make.
It seems so simple.
It is. If a ship knows its berth won't be ready for 24 hours, it can just sail slower for 2 days instead of stopping and idling for one.
That sounds like basic common sense, but it must require monumental global coordination. How realistic is that across hundreds of competing ports?
That's the hurdle. It requires everyone, ports, pilots, terminals, shipping lines, all sharing data in real time. The technology is there, but the standardization and trust needed to make it work globally often isn't.
Okay, so these operational fixes, they buy us time, they save us maybe 20, 30%. But to hit that 2050 target, we have to deal with the other 70 to 80%. And that means switching the fuel, forcing owners into these massive high-stakes bets on new and often dangerous fuels.
That is the leap of faith the industry has to take. And the technical, financial, and safety challenges here are staggering.
Let's start with the transitional choice, liquefied natural gas, or LNG. It's cleaner than heavy fuel oil, but what's the climate catch, especially with what we said earlier about methane?
The catch is precisely methane. While LNG is great for cutting sulfur and NOx, its CO2 advantage is precarious because of methane slip.
And that is?
The unburned methane gas that escapes during combustion, often through the engine's exhaust and all along the supply chain.
Right, and because methane is 28 times more potent than CO2, a small leak has a massive consequence.
Massive. If you have a high-slip engine, a slip rate of just 3% can wipe out over half of the CO2 benefit compared to just burning traditional fuel oil. Rigorous well-to-wake measurement is essential here, otherwise LNG is just a bridge to nowhere, climate-wise.
Okay, so now for the true zero-carbon contenders, methanol, ammonia, and hydrogen. Let's start with methanol. Many see it as the easiest switch because it's a liquid.
It is attractive because it's a liquid at ambient temperature, so it fits existing infrastructure much better than cryogenic gases. But it has two huge commercial problems. First, lower energy density. A vessel needs about double the storage volume for the same voyage range.
Which means sacrificing cargo space, and that's sacrificing revenue. What's the second, more critical climate problem?
It's the well-to-wake problem all over again, just magnified. Methanol's climate benefit depends entirely on how it's produced. If you use gray methanol made from natural gas, you haven't decarbonized anything. You have to use green methanol made from renewables, or your investment is worthless from a climate perspective.
Then there is ammonia. It gets a lot of hype because it's carbon-free at the stack.
It's very compelling for the zero CO2 promise, but it is brutally difficult to handle. It's profoundly toxic, corrosive, and requires massive safety overhauls. Like methanol, its energy content is about half that of conventional fuels, so you need big tanks. But the primary concern is just crew and port safety. A leak is immediately dangerous to human life.
And finally, hydrogen. The ultimate clean fuel, right? Emits only water. But this sounds like the biggest technical bet of all.
It requires the greatest overhaul. Hydrogen's energy density is so low that even as a liquid, it needs complex cryogenic storage at an incredible -253 degrees C.
Wow.
And the sources really emphasize the leak risk. Its tiny molecules can escape easily, so you need robust, high-volume ventilation and detection systems on the ship. We are basically asking the maritime industry to become experts in deep cryogenics overnight.
This raises the essential logistical question. What about the infrastructure? I mean, it's irrelevant to have a $200 million ammonia-ready ship if the world's ports can't fuel it.
Port bunkering readiness is the absolute litmus test. Ports need to invest billions in specialized storage and handling for these fuels, and standardization is crucial. We need common connectors, universal safety protocols, otherwise you create chaos.
So it's clear this isn't cheap. We're talking about replacing the entire fueling architecture of global commerce. How is this financed, and what are the global rules pushing this forward beyond just the IMO's technical standards?
So the IMO provides the regulatory framework, the CII, EEXI. But the real leverage, the real power, comes from what are called market-based measures, or MBMs.
And how does that financial muscle actually work?
MBMs put a predictable and, crucially, an ever-increasing cost on carbon. This makes every high-carbon choice a shipowner makes less viable than the low-emission alternative. So, for example, under a carbon tax, if you use heavy fuel oil, you pay a penalty for every ton of CO2. That penalty makes green methanol, even with its higher upfront cost, economically competitive in the long run.
So MBMs turn a regulatory threat into a commercial opportunity for the first movers. How is the capital itself flowing into these huge projects?
The industry is relying more and more on linking finance directly to environmental performance. So you have instruments like green bonds, which link capital pools to specific environmental projects, but the real innovation is in sustainability-linked loans. SLLs.
Explain that for us.
With an SLL, the bank basically says, we'll give you a lower interest rate on your loan, but only if your fleet's CII score stays above a B grade for 3 straight years.
So compliance is literally tied to the cost of money.
Exactly. If your ship's performance slips, your borrowing cost goes up. It creates this powerful, immediate, and continuous financial incentive for discipline.
This level of financial pressure, though, naturally leads to a question of fairness. Who risks being left behind in this global race?
The sources really highlight this. The issue of regional equity and fuel access and the need for a just transition for workers. If only the wealthy ports in North America or Europe can afford the new infrastructure, the hydrogen tanks, the shore power, it creates these massive geographic winners and losers.
And that risks backlash.
It risks regulatory fragmentation and political backlash from developing nations that rely on maritime trade. Policy has to include targeted financing and support to ensure vulnerable ports can afford this new infrastructure. Otherwise, they become stranded assets.
And finally, we have to talk about the people on the front lines, the crews. They're now being asked to handle extremely toxic or volatile substances. The human dimension here seems central.
It is indispensable. New fuels like ammonia and hydrogen require a fundamental, profound shift in crew competency. Training can't just be refresher courses anymore. It has to move entirely to scenario-based drills that test real-time decision-making under high stress.
What kind of scenarios?
Managing an ammonia leak in an enclosed space, responding to a cryogenic breach in a hydrogen tank, safely controlling these complex dual-fuel engines. Crew training and certification are central, not just to preventing accidents, but also to getting insurance approval for these new systems.
So what does this all mean? This deep dive shows us that maritime decarbonization isn't one huge problem. It's 1,000 interlocking systems, from optimizing hull turbulence to negotiating global carbon markets. It really highlights the tension between the quick, affordable operational fixes, slow steaming, coatings, and that long, risky, and astronomically expensive bet on new fuels like ammonia and hydrogen.
Precisely. The challenge isn't just finding the technology anymore. It's integrating that technology with transparent finance, with globally standard policy, auditable data, and most importantly, human competence. The success of a multi-million-dollar retrofit depends entirely on a cruise discipline, a clear financial incentive from the CII, and a port being ready to bunker the new fuel.
It makes you realize that the industry that wins the race to net zero won't be the one that invents some miracle fuel. It'll be the one that first figures out how to build trusted, tamper-proof data systems and reliable supply chains that reward measurable performance, not just promises. The ultimate success of this whole transition won't be determined by the ship's engine, but by the paperwork, the financial contract, and the competence of the person holding the nozzle.